So this is part two. The video cut off, so here we are. Anyway, talking about how toxic masculinity, internalized toxic masculinity, can play a role in the daughter-in-law and mother-in-law having a high conflict relationship. And don't get me wrong, this is not eliminating the factor of self-accountability and self-regulation, right? That's not eliminating that. I talked about that in the last video. This is about how culturally ideals of how a relationship between a family, between a woman and her husband, and between the husband and the mother-in-law, okay? A lot of times you hear people say, well, the mother-in-law just can't let her son go. She needs to let him grow up and this and that and the other. Sometimes that's the case. I've been on the receiving end of a mother who didn't want to let her son go. So I totally get that. There are other times when it is nothing to do with the mother-in-law and everything to do with how the daughter-in-law was taught that a relationship between an in-law and her, or an in-law and your family, should go. When you have mothers, and I talked about this in the last video, when you have mothers who live through their children and they live through their own traumas, their own childhood traumas and disordered patterns, and they pass those on to their children as a warning or to heed this warning. You can have a disruption within a family that happens, and it can destroy the relationship within the family that can echo for generations. Ask yourself, how many people do you know that have lost contact with the family member because the family and the new partner didn't get along? There's probably a lot of people that you can think of, if not for yourself personally, people that you may know of, right? And so that's why this is important to have these type of discussions, because the more we know, the more we get into the secrets, right? The little, not the little, but the belief system that what goes on in this family stays in this family, and I'm too ashamed to talk about the fact that I'm estranged from my adult child. As we get more into this, it creates more of a dialogue. Even if people don't agree, it creates a dialogue for people to start delving into things. Why is that happening? Is that something that's happening in my family? Am I playing a role in the destruction of my family? I see so much online videos of people talking about their relationship, either it be from the mother-in-law's perspective or it be from the adult child's perspective, right? And I always wonder if they've ever considered the role that they play within that dynamic. Is it always outward pointing, right? Because it takes two to destroy a relationship. And although there could be, and I mentioned this in the last video, and I'm not a therapist, and I should have did the disclaimer. I'm not a mental health therapist, counselor, none of that. What I share with you here is through my own personal experiences, what I've learned through research and reading and watching video and other parents who've gone through this, watching series or webinars on parental estrangement, and from hearing other people's stories. That's what I share. And I don't think we, really give enough credit to the fact that a lot of the challenges that family face in parental estrangement have a lot to do with generational curses, generational toxic family patterns that people haven't dealt with, right? We have this culture of newfound culture, rather. I'm a Gen Xer, and within my generation, we had the boomers who were all about family, all about keeping their families together. Within my generation is where we saw the divorce rate skyrocket, right? And so there has been this continuous change and evolution of what our families look like. And they're straying further and further away from the togetherness that families had once before. Now, some would argue that that's because more people are aware of what toxic families look like and they don't want any part of that. And that may be the case. But what I can tell you, as someone who grew up in a family that had many challenges, that did love each other greatly, but a lot of what was standing between more cohesive family, more togetherness, was the fact that people weren't willing to be accountable. People weren't willing to address toxic generational patterns and behaviors that had just echoed through the generations. And so it just, as you know, the new generations came, there became more and more of a divide. And so what we're seeing now, studies are telling and showing us that now within the millennials, there's a higher, that's my dog acting out, but there's a higher incident of parental estrangement happening. And although some of that can be attributed to the fact that there's more information out there about mental health, about what, you know, healthy families look like, how to protect yourself, how to set boundaries, and self-care being also protecting ourselves from toxic family members, right? Within this dynamic, we're leaving out a very key component, and that is that sometimes people are the way they are because they haven't learned differently. What I've come across within the Gen Xers and the millennials, there's this struggle that's going on continuously, a tug of war, a culture war about belief systems and about politics and about family structure and how people are raised. And we have a new generation of young people who are more sexually liberated. And so for those within Gen X that live with the boomers and carried that belief system on into their lives and potentially with the lives of their children, there's a new belief system that you guys are the prudes, and we don't want to deal with you, you don't want to change, you don't want to do the work, we don't have to deal with you. And that's what this whole new drive of no contact, right? And so what's happening is no contact may be a solution for people who have family members with very disordered behaviors and that are unmanaged and are not seeking help and are intentionally causing harm and wounding people. In that case, yes, you expect someone to protect themselves, to cut contact off so that they can live, so that they don't have that drama in their lives, right? At the same time, we're lumping together parents and children who may, with some insight, with some education, with more information, learn to become accountable, learn what they've contributed to the breakdown in their family relationship, and be able to change it, be able to come back together, to reconcile, to work through their disagreements, to agree to disagree, or as in the, oh gosh, I don't have the book with me, but I read an article, and I'll put it down in the description of this video, the book that I'm referring to. But in that book regarding parental estrangement, the woman who did the research and interviewed families found out that a lot of times the relationship didn't change until the individual decided, I'm going to have a relationship with them because it's important to me. And then they continued the relationship with a measure of caution, but then the parent was able to come around eventually, or the child was able to come around eventually and recognize how they may have been part of the issue and how the relationship broke down, and then they're able to then start from there rebuilding their relationship. So there is hope, right? I'm not encouraging people to stay in contact with people who cause harm. That's not fair to you. Your mental health is of utmost importance. And so if it's necessary to put some space between you and an individual who refuses to be accountable, who intentionally causes harm, then that's what's necessary. And that's justified. How does internalized toxic masculinity play a role in a relationship? Let's think about how we were taught the relationship between a mother and her daughter and the mother and her son. There is an old wives' tale or saying that the daughter is with the mother forever, but the son is only there until he takes the wife. So it says something about a daughter is yours for life, but a son is yours until he takes the wife. I think that's it. So when we think about the origin of those, type of belief systems those type of quotes, rather, that actually stem from certain belief systems that people have around what a relationship in a family looks like, then it gets a little easier to understand how that can influence the way an individual believes that someone is supposed to behave, right? Or the way they're supposed to have a relationship. Sometimes there's a relationship, and in the case of me and my children, I was a very young mom. And so I married when I was 17. Well, I married on my 18th birthday. And I had my son a month later. So I was pregnant when I got married. We married a month later, and we were both children. And we both came to the relationship with our own wounds and our own trauma. And it was just a very bad trauma bond. And we created a very unhealthy environment, and it required for us to have to be apart. Domestic violence was involved. It was lots of emotional and mental abuse. It was lots of abuse, and so that meant we needed to go our separate ways. But what I learned was that we didn't have the tools to be parents. We didn't have the tools to be a husband and a wife. And so we went into that relationship, myself, coming into that relationship out of the programming of religious programming, I should say. And so going into that relationship, the belief system was I was going to be the wife. I was going to listen to my husband. I was basically leaving my mother and father and going to a new father, if we really want to be, tell the truth about it. And so the husband made all the decisions in the home. I needed to ask for permission. I needed to be the dutiful wife, to take care of the children, cook the dinner, this and that and the other. So that's the belief system that I grew up under. I carried that over into my marriage. I carried it into subsequent relationships, and it was very toxic. Why? Because that is not an even system. There's not a level of respect for both parties. No one should be in servitude to the other. That's not a true marriage. And so, although it took me some time to get that lesson, during the course of that time, there are certain belief systems that were in place, right? And so I believed that I was to serve my mother-in-law. I was to, show her reverence because she was as the queen. And that's how I was taught. That's how I was raised up, because my mother had endured such ugliness from my mother-in-law of my biological father and then the mother-in-law of my then stepdad. And my mom would always talk to us about how important it was not to be that way, not to do this, not to do the other, right? And so that drove me to, and I should mention also, as I did in the last video, codependency plays a huge role in how breakdowns of families, happen as well, and how we influence our children, right? So we parent from that wound. And so that put me in a position to where I suffered greatly under the weight of toxic masculinity, internalized toxic masculinity. I suffered under the weight of codependency. And so that created an individual with the personality that was going to draw someone who is abusive, someone who has a past that they are wounded and they haven't healed, and they are bringing that into. So that's what I mean when I say we trauma bonded, right? For my husband, there was the belief system, because he was raised up as religion too, that the man just lorded over the woman, right? And that he told her what to do. And I shared in the video previous to these two how I had an engagement with his uncle who said that I was supposed to leave my family and not have anything to do with my family and to only be with him, and I would only listen to him and his family, right? That's the you know, the dynamic that we had. And so when it came time for me and my mother-in-law, I was very, you know, docile. I didn't say anything. It took me, I would say I was in my 30s when I finally said, you know what, my kids are old enough to talk to you by themselves. I don't have to have any contact with you anymore, and I prefer that you just talk with them, because this has been very tough for me. And I say that because no matter what he and I went through, I kept my children in touch with his family. No matter what I experienced, the betrayal, the extra children, I kept my children in touch with their family. But that was because of my own childhood and my own understanding of what it felt like to be separated from my father's family, because my grandmother wouldn't accept my mother and my father passed away, and I just never had a relationship with my father's family. And so, in late in my life, into my 30s, then I finally started to meet some of my family members on that side of the family. But it was us coming together and the bringing of those two toxic, you know, family patterns and behaviors together. Well, when you come into a relationship between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, and I said this in the last video, sometimes the generational curses you're trying to break, because you see things manifesting themselves in a certain way, you start to believe that it happened. It has to be something within you. It has to be something that you're doing wrong, right? And it's not necessarily always the case. Sometimes you're dealing with the manipulation and the toxic family and generational patterns from your in-laws' side. And if you have a mother who has experienced some horrible things with her own mother-in-law, and she makes a decision that she's not going to let that happen to her daughter, and she gets involved and stands in the middle and keeps conflict going between the daughter and the mother-in-law, the daughter's husband's mother, that's toxic. And it's a very difficult family dynamic to navigate. You can also have it where the mother of the daughter-in-law can be very, protective over the relationship she has with her daughter. And she may not want to share her with the mother-in-law. And so that can be the belief system. And so when I say internalized toxic masculinity, I want to say this, and I don't want it to seem anti-man, right? But when it comes to conflict, when it comes to being able to resolve issues, normally as women, we have the ability to see past what's happening and be emotionally involved and say, this is about something bigger than what I'm feeling, and it's more important to me to have this so I can put my emotions in the back burner, right? Where a internalized toxic masculinity comes into play is the belief system that I'm not going to give up power. I need to maintain control. And the only way I can do that is to manipulate and to cause havoc, because in that way, then I'm in control of the situation and no one is telling me what to do or running me, right? And it took me a while to understand that the relationship that I dreamed of having with the daughter-in-law, thinking that she was going to be like my bonus daughter and we were going to embrace each other, we were going to go shopping, we were going to spend time with each other, and she'd lay on my lap and I'd rub her belly. All those things that I imagined for my family because I wanted something different for us. Those were not the reality. And sometimes as mothers, we have to give up the reality. We have to give up the illusion or the desire that we wanted within a daughter-in-law and embrace the reality of what is. Not turning the relationship between you and your daughter-in-law into a tug of war for who your son is going to choose to say, okay, you're right. It's not about that. That's that man's family. He deserves to make the decisions, make the mistakes, just like you did, just like we did. He deserves to learn and to evolve and to work on his marriage and to be with who he chooses to be with. We can see all the bad happening and going on, but as I mentioned to you in the last video, that's not our place to call it out. Unless we see that our son is in trouble to be harmed, physically, or something horrible is happening, we shouldn't be involved in that relationship. That's not our place. And the more we get into the middle of that, and as I mentioned in the last video, if the daughter-in-law is disordered, has disordered behaviors, because of trauma, because of patterns that have been passed down, we aren't doing anything but creating the perfect storm. I shared in a video before these two about how sometimes our children, we raise them to be good people. We raise them to take care of their families, to go above and beyond for their friends and to stick it out and to fight for what they love. And they can come into contact with people who are predatory. And those people can have predatory family members who can continuously create an environment that works in their favor. I don't want to share my grandkids. I don't want to share my daughter. So I'm going to create this environment so that I stay in control. I don't want to miss a holiday. I don't want to miss a birthday. I don't want to have to share. I don't like them. And that's another thing. You can have a mother-in-law of your daughter, your daughter's mother, your daughter-in-law's mother can have a jealous and hateful spirit, and she could just not like the mother-in-law or the father and not want to be bothered with them. And the way to control that situation is to manipulate and exploit how the daughter feels for her. And that happens. And so it was important to have this discussion because, as I mentioned in the last video, we want to be mindful that, is this us? Is this me? Do I see some similarities in what's being discussed? Is that me? Right? We don't want to be the person laying the bricks down, paving the road to parental estrangement. Before I end and close here, I want to say this. Reconciliation is without our control. It's out of our control. We have no decision making in that process, especially if we didn't choose parental estrangement, okay? Reconciliation rests in the hands of our adult children. I did a video some time ago about not being taken advantage of by our children, because there are also instances where parents are going through issues with their children where they are being exploited. Okay, well, I'll let you back in as long as you watch the kids whenever I call you, as long as you let me borrow money whenever I call you, as long as you come and you don't say anything and you let people treat you bad and whatever, then I'll deal with you. But if you don't want to do that and you want to stand up for yourself and you want to create boundaries, then you're not allowed, right? You have to make a decision as a parent what's healthy for you as well. What's good for your well-being? Is that an environment that you want to be in? Is that something that you want to have to change completely, be a mute, be completely open to whatever treatment is going to be sent your way, and have no one respect your boundaries? Or would you rather have intermittent times with your family and enjoy them while they're there and you guys go your separate ways? Sometimes that's the reality of it. Sometimes there's not going to be a functional relationship between you and your daughter-in-law or son-in-law. And sometimes us being the older, the eldest, we make a decision. I'm going to love my child and my grandchildren and tolerate this individual and make the best of this situation. I won't speak into their lives, and I won't allow the confusion to come into my life. And you deal with whatever amount of time that you're given to be with your grandchildren or with your son or daughter, and you keep it moving. Because if nothing else, you remember from this experience and that I want to share with you, and that is, you are more than a parent. You are a woman, individually, independent of your family. You deserve joy, peace, and happiness, and contentment, and no fighting, and no conflict. You deserve that. And if that's what you're going to receive, count yourself, what is that? It's an old school saying, count it all joy. You will worry if your child is all right, but I tell you what, one thing I've come to understand is I'm not going to be there anyway to be able to help if something did happen. I'm still going to have to deal with whatever it is. So I can make a choice, and you can too, to continue to live your life. You have did all the work that you can. You have been accountable, and I'm talking about this for mothers who have been accountable for behavior, and they've reconciled with their children, and they're stuck in this cycle of I'm cool with you, I'm not. I'm cool with you, I'm not. Because at that point, it's no longer about reconciliation, it's about power and control. And so I just wanted to share that with you, and I hope that something here encouraged you and inspired you to start doing the work on yourself, to start getting away from toxic patterns, if that is what's hindering you, if that's what's standing between a healthy relationship between you and your adult child. Because when it's all said and done, you, and I'll tell you this, and I said this to both of my daughter-in-laws, regardless to what you do, regardless to what you think, my blood still courses through his veins and those children. You can't remove me. But what I will do is respect your wishes. And so to you, I say, your bloodline goes forth. You ask the Creator for peace and compassion for yourself and for whatever is happening in that dynamic between you and your adult child and their family, and you move forward with your life. I spent years depressed, severely depressed, hating who I was, feeling that I failed, only to come to an understanding that it was now about me living my life. I had been accountable. I have apologized. I've done the work. It's time for me to live. And I'm hoping that out of this discussion and my sharing, that's what you're going to take away from this. It's time for you to live. Thank you for coming in for the second part. My name is LaShawn Splain Wilburn. I support moms who may be navigating parental estrangement by prioritizing their accountability, their healing, their self-care, and a commitment to lifelong learning, because that's the only way we are going to evolve and continue to be our best selves and live the life that we desire and are excited to wake up to. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.